A 28-year-old warehouse worker goes in for an MRI after months of managing back pain on his own, exercises, stretch anti-inflammatories, and the doctor looks at the scan and says, quote, "You broke it. Surgery necessary." His words, "My whole world is completely upside down." And here's the thing, he never had one dramatic accident. No forklift collision, no falling shelf. Just shift after shift, twist after twist, until his sciatic nerve had had enough. Today, we're unpacking sciatica and foot drop in warehouse work, what these conditions actually are, why the warehouse environment is uniquely dangerous for your nervous system, and what workers and employers can actually do about it before things get to the surgery conversation. So let's get into it. What are we actually dealing with when we talk about sciatica in this context?
So sciatica is nerve pain. Specifically, it's irritation or compression of the sciatic nerve, which runs from your lower back all the way down through your leg. When that nerve gets compressed, you get this sharp, shooting pain that can radiate from the lower back down through the glute, the hamstring, sometimes all the way to the foot. And foot drop is what happens when that nerve compression gets severe enough that you actually lose the ability to lift the front part of your foot properly.
Dead man
You start
pedal.
dragging it, tripping, compensating with your whole gait.
So foot drop isn't a separate injury, it's like the end stage of untreated sciatica?
Essentially, yeah. It's what happens when the nerve damage has progressed far enough to affect motor function, not just pain signals. And that's what makes it so serious, because by the time you're dragging your foot, you've moved past discomfort into actual neurological impairment.
And how common is sciatica overall? Like, is this a niche condition, or are we talking about something that affects a huge chunk of the workforce?
It's massive. According to statistics compiled from sciatica research, as many as 40% of Americans will experience sciatica at some point in their lives. That's nearly half the population. And each year, about 5% of people develop it. So we're talking millions of new cases annually. It's one of the leading causes of nerve-related pain and lost productivity in the country.
40%. That's not a niche condition at all.
Not even close. And the demographic most likely to be affected? Men between the ages of 30 and 50, which, if you think about it, is exactly the demographic that makes up a huge portion of the warehouse labor force. People in physically demanding jobs in their prime working years.
So the people most at risk are also the people most likely to be doing this kind of work. That's a pretty grim overlap.
It really is. And what makes it worse is how these injuries develop. Dr. Sandra Hearn at Michigan Medicine, who's the Associate Chair of Education and Professional Development in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, led a review specifically on occupational nerve injuries. And her key finding was that many of these injuries don't have a clear moment of injury. They're cumulative trauma situations, compression, stretch, vibration, repetitive high-force movements, all building up over time.
So it's not like you lift one box wrong and suddenly you have sciatica.
Sometimes it can be. One bad twist can absolutely trigger a flare. But the underlying vulnerability is usually built up over months or years. Dr. Hearn put it really well. These mechanisms involve repetitive trauma with damage to the nerves over time. The twist is often just the moment the bill comes due.
That phrase, "the bill comes due," actually connects directly to something I came across in the research. There was a post on the sciatica subreddit from a 28-year-old warehouse worker, and his story is kind of a perfect illustration of exactly this. He'd been managing low back pain for years, exercises, stretches, anti-inflammatories. Things were okay. Then one day he twisted to the left and everything fell apart. MRI showed severe disc damage. Doctor said surgery was necessary.
And what's striking about that story is the symptom list he described. Numbness on the bottom of his foot, pins and needles in his toes, tight calf, pain in the knee, hamstring, hip, and glute. That's a textbook progression of sciatic nerve compression. Each of those symptoms is the nerve sending a signal that it's under serious stress.
And he was still trying to work through it. He said he was leaving earlier and earlier each shift because he couldn't withstand standing that long.
Which is exactly the pattern that makes warehouse sciatica so dangerous. Workers push through because the job demands it, because there are quotas, because calling out has consequences. And every shift they push through is potentially more nerve compression, more damage accumulating.
Okay, so let's get into the why warehouse specifically question. Because lots of jobs are physically demanding. What is it about warehouse work that creates this particular risk?
So, there's actually a really significant study on this. It looked at 3,891 participants over a follow up period of 111,416 person years and tracked who ended up hospitalized for sciatica. The findings, reported through Complete Orthopedics, citing published literature, identified two major occupational risk factors: lifting or carrying heavy objects and exposure to whole body vibration. Both of those are daily realities in warehouse work.
Wait, vibration? Like from forklifts?
Exactly. Forklift operators are sitting on equipment that vibrates constantly through their shift. That whole body vibration transmits directly to the spine, and over time, it's a significant risk factor for disc damage and sciatic nerve compression. It's one of those things that doesn't feel dramatic in the moment, but adds up fast.
And what about the lifting with bad form, like the bent back, straight knee thing?
That's specifically flagged in the research as a risk factor for herniated lumbar disc, which is one of the primary causes of sciatica. And trunk twisting during work is also called out. So when you picture a warehouse worker pulling a heavy box off a low shelf with a bent back and then twisting to place it on a conveyor, that's hitting multiple risk factors simultaneously.
And that's just a normal Tuesday in a warehouse.
Exactly. It's not an exceptional situation. It's the job description.
Okay, here's something that genuinely surprised me in the research. I would have assumed that the hardest physical labor, like the most demanding warehouse jobs, would be the worst for sciatica. But that's not quite what the data shows, right?
This is one of the more counterintuitive findings. The research actually suggests that physically demanding work may have a protective effect against sciatica. What carries a higher risk of hospitalization is sedentary occupations that involve handling relatively heavy objects and physically light moving or standing jobs. So it's the mixed demand situation that's most dangerous.
So, like, someone who sits at a desk most of the day but then has to occasionally lift heavy things is actually at higher risk than someone who's constantly moving and lifting?
That's what the data suggests. The body adapts to consistent physical demands. It's the inconsistency, the static posture combined with sudden heavy loads, that seems to be particularly damaging. And a lot of warehouse roles actually fall into this category. You're standing in one position for long stretches, then suddenly lifting, twisting, reaching.
So it's not just about how heavy the work is, it's about the pattern of the work.
Precisely. And that's actually a really important reframe for how we think about prevention. Because if you just tell workers lift less, you're missing the point. The issue is static posture, poor task sequencing, no rotation, the system around the lifting, not just the lifting itself.
That connects to something I found really striking in the warehouse ergonomics research: the idea that musculoskeletal disorders are commonly underestimated because symptoms develop gradually. Workers ignore early warning signs like fatigue or discomfort and only report injuries when the pain becomes severe.
And by then, you've often already done significant damage. The HSE case study of a 400,000 square foot distribution center found that pallet stacking, case picking, and shelving tasks accounted for the highest proportion of reported injuries. And the contributing factors weren't just the tasks themselves, it was inadequate training, inefficient material flow, and lack of adjustable equipment. The environment was set up to injure people.
A 400,000 square foot facility. That's a massive operation. And they were seeing a rising tide of ergonomic injury reports over 2 years before they actually did something about it.
Right. And what's important about that case study is what they found when they actually looked. The storage systems required frequent overhead lifting, extended reaching, and repeated bending. These weren't freak accidents, they were baked into the workflow. The injury was the predictable output of the system.
So what does OSHA actually say about this? Because there are legal standards here, right?
OSHA's General Duty Clause, Section 5A Pleasure of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. And musculoskeletal disorders absolutely qualify. OSHA also has specific ergonomics guidance for warehousing under the General Industry Standards, 29 CFR 1910.
So the legal framework exists. The question is whether it's actually being applied.
That's the gap. And OSHA's own guidance on controlling ergonomic hazards is pretty clear about the hierarchy. Engineering controls first, things like lifting devices, repositioned work tables, conveyor diverters that bring materials toward the worker instead of requiring them to reach and lean. Then administrative controls, task rotation, two-person lifts for heavy loads. Personal protective equipment is listed as having only limited effectiveness for ergonomic hazards.
So the answer isn't just wear a back brace.
Not even close. OSHA is pretty explicit that personal protection solutions have limited effectiveness when dealing with ergonomic hazards. The real interventions are structural: change the equipment, change the workflow, change the task sequencing. That's what actually moves the needle on injury rates.
And California's Division of Occupational Safety and Health actually has a fact sheet specifically for warehouse workers that gets into this.
Task rotation is in there, rotating tasks to change motions and give affected body parts a rest, using carts, dollies, portable scissor lifts. And there's a notable line: employers cannot require workers to meet quotas that prevent or interfere with meal or rest breaks or any occupational health and safety standard. That quota piece is huge, because quota pressure is one of the main reasons workers skip the micro breaks, skip the rotation, skip the proper lifting technique. When you're racing a number, your body pays the price.
And that's exactly the environment that creates the cumulative nerve damage Dr. Hearn was describing.
Completely. The biomechanical stressors she identified, compression, stretch, vibration, repetitive high-force movements, all of those are amplified when you're working at pace under quota pressure with no rotation and worn-out footwear on a concrete floor.
Okay, the footwear thing, I want to dig into that because it came up in a way I didn't expect. The instinct is to buy the softest, most cushioned shoes you can find, but that's apparently not the right call.
Yeah, this is one of those things that feels counterintuitive but makes sense when you think about it. The research on managing sciatica in standing jobs suggests that the problem isn't just cushioning, it's stability and support. Shoes that are very soft can actually reduce the stable base your body needs to maintain proper posture. What you want is task-appropriate footwear with firm footing, not just the softest option on the shelf.
And the shoes that felt fine at the start of the shift might not be doing anything useful by hour 6.
Exactly. The research on warehouse sciatica management specifically calls out footwear that stops helping halfway through the day as one of the factors that quietly keeps symptoms alive. You're compensating your posture to deal with the discomfort, and that compensation creates new stress points.
So you're solving one problem and creating another.
Right. And the same logic applies to the floor surface. Concrete is particularly brutal because it provides no give. Every step transmits force directly up through the spine. Anti-fatigue mats, proper footwear, and task rotation are all part of the same system. You can't just fix one piece.
Let's talk about what happens when someone is already symptomatic. Because a lot of people listening to this might be in that position. They've got the back pain, maybe some leg numbness, and they're trying to figure out whether to push through or get help. What does the evidence say?
So the good news is that the majority of sciatica cases do resolve without surgery. The statistics suggest 80 to 90% of cases improve with conservative treatment, physical therapy, rest, stretching, and about 50% resolve within 6 weeks. So the prognosis for most people is actually reasonably good if they get help early.
But there's a significant chunk that doesn't resolve.
About 25% of sciatica sufferers deal with long-term symptoms, persistent pain, numbness, leg weakness. And that's where early intervention becomes critical. The longer you wait, the more nerve damage can accumulate, and the harder it becomes to fully recover. The warehouse worker on Reddit was asking whether earlier surgery would mean less nerve damage, and that instinct is medically sound. Nerve tissue doesn't regenerate easily.
And the warning signs that you've crossed from manage it territory into get help now territory, what are those?
The research is pretty clear on this. If you have weakness, not just pain, if you're having trouble lifting your foot, if you have numbness that's spreading, if there are any bladder or bowel changes, those are urgent red flags. That's the point where you're not managing sciatica anymore. You're dealing with potential permanent nerve damage. Get medical help immediately.
And the Reddit worker had numbness on the bottom of his foot and pins and needles in his toes. Those are on that list.
They are, and he was still trying to finish shifts. That's the reality of warehouse work. The economic pressure to keep showing up is enormous. But those symptoms are the nerve telling you it's in serious trouble.
There's also a case study from Manual Handling Injury Research, a 32-year-old warehouse employee lifting and stacking boxes over 25 kilograms each. He'd had basic training, but the pace of work meant he was bending his back instead of using his knees. After several weeks, severe back injury, surgery, extended rehabilitation, chronic pain, long-term inability to return to heavy labor.
And the lesson from that case study is exactly what we've been talking about. The employer needed to provide mechanical lifting aids, trolleys, conveyors, enforce rest breaks. But the pace of work made proper technique feel impossible. That's the system failing the worker.
And the employer paid for it too. Compensation claims, legal responsibilities, staff shortages, disruption to operations. It's not just a worker health issue, It's a business continuity issue.
Which is actually one of the strongest arguments for ergonomic investment. OSHA's own guidance notes that implementing ergonomic controls has reduced injury rates, lowered workers' compensation costs, and in many cases increased work efficiency and productivity. The business case is there, it's not just the ethical case.
So the argument that we can't afford to slow down for ergonomics is actually backwards.
Completely backwards. The cost of not doing it, in compensation claims, in turnover, in lost productivity from injured workers, almost always exceeds the cost of the intervention. And OSHA specifically notes that simple, low-cost solutions are often available. It doesn't always require a massive capital investment.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the protective effect of physically demanding work, because I think that's worth sitting with for a second. The research found that sedentary jobs with occasional heavy lifting are more dangerous than consistently demanding jobs. What does that mean practically for warehouse workers?
It means that the goal isn't to make warehouse work easier in a blanket sense, it's to make it more consistent and better sequenced. The body can handle physical demands when it's conditioned for them and when the demands are predictable. What it struggles with is the combination of prolonged static posture followed by sudden high-force movements. Task rotation addresses this directly. You're keeping the body moving in varied ways rather than locking it into one position and then shocking it with a heavy lift.
So rotation isn't just a nice to have, it's actually addressing the core mechanism of injury.
Exactly. And the research on managing sciatica in standing jobs frames it the same way. A rotation plan that changes load before pain spikes, not after. The goal is to prevent the flare, not respond to it.
Proactive, not reactive.
And that's a cultural shift as much as a procedural one. Because in a lot of warehouse environments, the culture is push through it. The research is pretty direct about this. The useful question isn't whether you're tough enough. It's whether your system is set up to protect you.
That's a really important reframe, because the tough it out mentality is so embedded in physical labor culture, and it's literally making people sicker.
It is. And the data backs that up. The workers who wait until pain is loud enough to negotiate with, to use the language from the research, are the ones who end up with chronic symptoms, with surgery, with long-term inability to return to work. Early intervention changes outcomes dramatically.
Okay, so here's what this really comes down to. We've covered a lot of ground: the biology of sciatica and foot drop, the specific risk factors in warehouse environments, the counterintuitive research on physical demand levels, the ergonomic interventions that actually work, and the warning signs that tell you it's time to stop managing and start getting medical help. What's the through line you'd want someone to walk away with?
The through line is that this is a systems problem, not a willpower problem. Sciatica and foot drop in warehouse work don't happen because workers aren't tough enough or careful enough. They happen because the environment, the concrete floors, the static postures, the quota pressure, the worn footwear, the lack of task rotation is set up to produce these injuries. And the research is clear that changing the system changes the outcomes. Engineering controls, task rotation, early intervention, proper footwear, these aren't luxuries. They're the difference between a career and a surgery.
And for workers who are already feeling those early warning signs, the fatigue, the occasional leg pain, the numbness that comes and goes, the message is, don't wait for it to get loud.
Don't wait, because by the time it's loud, the nerve has already been under stress for a long time. The 80 to 90% of cases that resolve without surgery, those are the people who got help early, who made changes before the damage compounded. The 25% with long-term symptoms are often the ones who pushed through until they couldn't anymore.
And employers, the legal framework is there. OSHA's General Duty Clause, the ergonomics guidance, the California warehouse worker protections around quotas. The tools exist. The question is whether they're being used.
And the business case is there too. Lower injury rates, lower compensation costs, lower turnover, higher productivity. The HSE case study showed that ergonomic interventions produce measurable results. This isn't idealism, it's just good operations management. Here's what I keep coming back to from that Reddit post. This 28-year-old had been managing his symptoms for years, doing the exercises, seeing the doctors, trying to stay in the game. And then one twist, one moment, and his words were, "My whole world is completely upside down." That's not a dramatic exaggeration. That's what nerve damage does to a life. And the tragedy is that it was predictable. Not inevitable, predictable. The signals were there, the risk factors were there. The system around him wasn't set up to catch it before it became a crisis.
So the shift doesn't break you all at once. It does it quietly, One long station block, one concrete floor, one pair of shoes that stopped helping 3 hours ago. But now you know what to look for. You know what to ask your employer. You know when to stop pushing through and start getting help. And that knowledge, that's the difference between catching this early and ending up in an MRI room being told you broke it. Thanks for being here for this one, and thanks to everyone listening to Co-Pilot Podcasts.
What they left out was the whatever you want to call it, symbolism of calling the dead man pedal on the pit the dead man pedal as it relates to sciatica and the drop foot. Because when I was doing it, my feet were hurting so bad that I had to start switching feet. I was using my left foot on the dead man pedal versus my right foot and switching back and forth because my right hurt more than the left. And also, I had to take my shoe off. I would take my shoe off and then use my left foot with the shoe on in the V&As because no one could see. Now, when I go out in high traffic areas, I don't know if they noticed. They did, they didn't care. Because they didn't ask. They didn't say anything. They just let me keep going. And they already knew, by calling it the dead man pedal, that it has to do with sciatica, which is a brutal, excruciating pain. And I remember waking up and thinking I had no circulation, like in my arms, my hands, they were tingling. And that is your circulation. That's what sciatica is also. It's part of your whole entire nervous system, blood circulation, you name it. It's your serpentine belt. The car doesn't run if its serpentine belt is broken. And why in the hell did warehouse work get to be so repetitive? Why can't it be pick, pack, fix your own errors until the product is complete by one person? Why do you have to have one person for pick, one person for pack, one person for staging it for the driver? And you know, it just keeps going from there, and then you have your problem solvers. And then you have your inventory control, quality assurance. I've been retaliated against so bad for this, but I'll make it to the Supreme Court because of it. And my name is Catherine Rowe Gary. Investigations LLC. And I am registered with the California Secretary of State and FinCEN. May not be in the search results, but I am legitimate. Everything I do, every investigation I search clues for has biblical validation. Always it has to. It's a requirement of a theologian, case pathologies, research investigator. And unfortunately, Fidelity refuses to allow me to access my account, even though Amazon is the plan sponsor. They say they have nothing to do with it. You can't help with it. They're probably the ones that are the team who made the business decision to no longer do business with me. After all, it is called an Amazon 401k plan, not Fidelity. Even though Fidelity is also, they're just the bottom rung of Amazon and their 401k plan. And this has been Catherine's Speakeasy afterwards, after the co-pilot podcast, because it never says exactly what I would like for it to say. Maybe someday when I get my own show, eh?